Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Teacher's Point of View. I can't believe I've got this superstar back onto the second season. I kind of feel a little bit nostalgic having you back on, Mr. Tait. But everyone, Jon Tait, and so Jon. I mean, obviously you've kind of came on in sort of November and started off the Teacher's Point of View in some respects, like bringing it forward. And I mean, ultimately, like let's just start off with the last couple of months. I mean, how has it been?
It's been very interesting, and first of all, thanks for having me back on again. I enjoyed it last time, and it's great to talk kind of education. It's been an interesting time. You know, last time we spoke, we were talking about the fact that we were back in school, but some kids were isolating at home, some kids were in school, and then obviously, as everyone knows now, it got to a stage where it was really a situation that they couldn't continue. So it's been very difficult. I know that. Particularly in November and December, we had a lot of our staff that were having to teach hybrid lessons. So they were having to teach students that were in front of them in the classroom, but also turning around to the kids that were on the laptop who were self-isolating. And that was just an incredible feat, really, to be able to do that and to do it really well. And we had, across our three schools in the trust, we had about 75% of students in one of the schools that had to self-isolate at some point, and I think it was about 55% across all three schools. So we were hit quite badly by those periods of disruption and self-isolation, and teachers therefore had to really pick up the mantle of how they could do those hybrid lessons. And then since then, we all know what's happened and then unfolded over Christmas. That's thrown us into more of a chaos, I suppose. Or, well, it was chaos for a few days in terms of are we doing testing, our kids coming back, and obviously primary schools did come back for a day, which everyone knows was quite ridiculous. And now we've got the situation where all of our students are at home, apart from key worker students, and teachers are delivering those lessons hour by hour, to students at home. So it's been a very interesting time, but one that, although people have moaned about it, and in some reasons quite rightly because of the things that have been dropped on us at short notice, I think as a profession we've been extremely strong and resilient, and we've got on with things, and we're doing a great job. And I know that lots of the feedback that our schools are getting from parents and from students is that they're really appreciative of what we're doing. They think everything, they think it's definitely a step further forward than the first lockdown, and there's some great feedback coming in for us. So it's really nice to see.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I absolutely love about you, Jon, is that you have a very, very positive kind of approach to things. I mean, you're very kind of solution focused opposed to kind of just dwelling on problems. And I love that kind of following you on social media. That's one of my favorite things about kind of what you're about. So, yeah, I mean, thanks for coming back on. But ultimately, because I don't want to kind of attack the DFE by any means. But what have we learned from these last sort of 10 to 12 months, and what kind of do we need to incorporate kind of into the education that we move forward with?
I think we've learned a lot. We've certainly learned a lot about how we deliver remote education and the differences between the different methods that we can take. And certainly, I think there's lots that we can capitalize on and move forward with into education in the future, because my point of view is certainly that I don't want this to be just utilizing digital technology because we're doing remote learning. I really want us to capitalize on that and move forward with that, and it become the new normal. I mean, we've heard that phrase too many times now, but actually really make it stick and make it mean like it's the new normal. And I think I said last time we've kind of moved forward 5 years in 5 months type of idea as a profession thinking about digital technology. But in terms of go back to unpacking that question in terms of that, what have we learned? I think that there's more than one way to skin a cat, in terms of there's more than one way to deliver remote education. And I think that when you hear people talk about politicians, now talking about live lessons and live learning, I don't necessarily think they actually mean properly live lessons. What they really mean is not just a PowerPoint stuck on Google Classroom and off you go. They actually mean something delivered by a teacher. Now, there's a big debate at the moment about whether or not live or recorded, lessons are better or worse than each other. And I think that's what maybe politicians don't understand. When they say live, what they mean is delivered by a teacher. I don't think they mean actually at that exact time. So there are different ways to do that. And we've been looking at that over the last few weeks, really. And I think I'm in a really privileged position to look at that from 2 or 3 different ways. And I think that, I see that from my expertise in digital technology, I see it from a school leader point of view in terms of what staff can deliver and how we can get that to work. But also I see it from a parental point of view. I've got 2 children of my own, one who's in year 8, and she's learning right this minute upstairs right now. And actually she was doing a PE lesson, upstairs in our spare room, and I could hear the floor bouncing. Do you know what I mean? So she was doing some kind of physical activity. And my son's in year 12 at sixth form. And he hasn't got any lessons this afternoon, but he had some lessons this morning. So I feel privileged to be able to see it from the end user point of view, as well as from the the point of delivery. And I think that's really important, because there may be a lot of teachers out there watching or listening to this who aren't parents. And I think it's important to understand what the end user experience is like, and not just think about how you're going to deliver it, but actually how's it going to be received. So, and I'll unpack that in a second. But I think from that idea of live lessons versus recorded lessons, I think that there's pros and cons, and some really great kind of ways to use both of them. I think from a live point of view, and we found this from the difference between the first lockdown to now, is that it's created more routine in people's in households. So there isn't necessarily any debate about when students do work, because kids are kids. They'll always say, I'll do it later, or I don't need to do it straight away, or I'll do this first. And even in our house, we had loads of battles with our daughter about when she was going to do something, if she was going to do it, what she was going to do first. Whereas now, music, Monday morning, 9:15, no negotiation. That's when the timetable lesson was, because they're doing live lessons and she's following a timetable. So that routine of sticking to a live timetable kind of set of lessons, I think really, really helps parents. And I think we need to remember that it's about how can we make it easier on families as well. And I think that's certainly a real positive of those live lessons. There's also the fact that there's a real community kind of aspect to it, that everyone's joining it at the same time, a little bit like the Joe Wicks PE lesson, knowing that you are doing it whilst another 2 or 3 million people are doing it at the same time feels a lot different to you just clicking on it on YouTube and watching it whenever you want to on your own. Feels like you're part of something a little bit bigger, and there's a little bit more of a pull not to miss it because everyone else is doing it at the same time. And I think that's really interesting with live lessons as well, that it allows that kind of fear of missing out because everyone else is on there. You've also got the obvious things about interactivity and questioning that you can do with kids when it's live, through either a chat function, a poll, that kind of stuff. And those things you can't do with a recorded lesson. So those are some of the things that I think are really, really useful and really important. However, the flip side to that, and what I suppose I should have said at the start here, is there is no perfect way, because the perfect way is to be in front of kids in a classroom. What we're trying to do is find an alternative and a solution that's not going to be perfect. So, there are things that a live lesson doesn't do, and there are things that a recorded lesson, doesn't do, which I'll say now. So, recorded lessons are great because, from a workload point of view, you may decide to do the whole of the year 8 ones, and I might decide to do the whole of the year 7 ones. So we can share that workload out by creating those resources, because if classes are going to be doing the similar kind of things, then you can record it and share that workload. You can have experts doing it. There's also the fact that you can pause it, stop it, rewind it, watch it again. What did Mr. Tait say there? Let me scrub that back a little bit. Let me pause it and go to the toilet, or pause it. I need my pen. I need my pencil. I need to write something down. Right, I'll play it again. You can't do that with a live lesson. So that there are, and also the flip side of the routine as well is that you don't also have to be pigeonholed into thinking I have to do it at 9:15. Yeah. If mum or dad are using a laptop, or your internet's not great at that time, or you've only got one device in the house that you're sharing, then a live kind of schedule is quite difficult, because you might not be able to do it at that point. So recorded lessons, allow a bit more flexibility. So what I've supposed hopefully to demonstrate that there are pros and cons to both approach. Neither of them are perfect, because they all have their upsides, and actually the upside, the opposite to that is the flip side, which is on the other. Do you know what I mean? Everything that's great with a recorded lesson isn't great with a live lesson, and vice versa. There's kind of equal and opposites. And I suppose you need to then look at, if you listen to this thinking, well, what would be the best for me? It's exactly that. What's the best for you as a teacher? What's the best for your students? What's the best for your kind of, for your context? Have your students got devices? Have they got good internet connections? Have your parents been complaining about lack of routine? So you basically pick the right mode and the right method, or you do a little bit of both, and you do a bit of mixing in, and you do a little bit of live lessons as well as recorded. The recorded ones are great for watching, back at a later time. So I think that those are the things that we've really learned, really, in terms of there is more than one way to do things. But for me as a parent, in an ideal world, and again, I'm saying an ideal world, I know it's not an ideal world, but for us, the biggest advance in the second lockdown has been that routine, those live lessons, because it's stopped any negotiation with our kids about when they do it or how they do it or where it's timetabled, it's on. And they've also found that having a teacher actually deliver something to them rather than just a PowerPoint and work through it and hear some questions is far more engaging. It's far more like what teaching and school is like. And they've engaged with it far better than they did. And they kind of struggled with the first one because it wasn't. So in a nutshell, that's what I've learned, or we've learned from that process, really, and how it's made a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a very difficult one because ultimately you can never ever replace sort of face-to-face teaching. I mean, like kind of the rapport you get, like getting to know a child and getting to kind of actually understand like their energy in that moment, if they're actually engaged. I mean, it's very difficult to do that sort of over Zoom, and or like on Teams or whatever you use. So I mean, it's a difficult one. So what is the answer? Because ultimately, you said it depends on the school and the child's needs. But I mean, every child has different needs, right? So I mean, it's you're going to be kind of going back and forth in some respects on what's going to work for who. So I mean, what's the answer?
It's really difficult, and I don't think there is an actual answer, because if there was, we wouldn't be talking about it. Do you know what I mean? It's the great debate, isn't it, about what works best. Now, I suppose what I would say is that, to work out what the answer is for you personally, for whoever's watching or listening, is to think from that, like I said, about the end user experience. Now, I put something out on Twitter and LinkedIn last week saying that in our experience, lockdown, right now, there is 4 of us in this house. So myself and my wife, who are both doing education, video calls, either into schools, into organizations, that kind of stuff. So we're both needing a device, and we're both needing a stable internet connection. My daughter, who's in year 8, and my son are in year 12, they're both doing live lessons at various points in the day. They both need a device and an internet connection. And we also need a quiet space each. So we need at least 4 rooms. We need at least 4 devices. We need a decent internet connection. But also my children, my kids, need to be able to do what they're doing independently. They can't be coming down and saying, I need help with this, I need help with that, because we're in the middle of things like this at the same time as they're learning. So from a design point of view, you need to be thinking about, how will this be received in the home? And one of the probably one of the biggest things I've started to think about, really, is that I heard something a few weeks ago over Christmas by somebody saying to me that we need to be thinking that every student doesn't have a nice shiny laptop like we do. That they don't have a new phone. They might not have a brand new laptop with a big screen or a monitor or whatever else. So we need to be thinking about, when we're designing these activities, mobile first. How can the activity that I am delivering, either a lesson or a resource, be accessed on the most basic of mobile phones? So thinking about text size, font, different font choices and font size, different programs you're using, because actually the more you can use it as a one-stop shop, where kids aren't having to flick between Excel, PowerPoint, back to Zoom or Teams or Google Meet, etc., you're going to lose them if it's on a phone or if it's on a small device. Whereas if you can make it as easy as you possibly can to do that, whether that's live, whether that's recorded, do you know what I mean? But actually, with the recorded sense, it makes it a bit easier, because therefore you're not necessarily, hopefully, asking them to be flipping around all the time. But I just think it's thinking about how can they access it? How can it be as simple as possible to get students to click a button, watch it, and be able to kind of interact and do some work with it. And there are lots of different ways to do that. You can have a whole hour's lesson where you're talking to people, or you can just do like an activation and a starter where you do 5 or 10 minutes at the start of the lesson where you're talking through something, and then you tell students to close the call down or pause the video if it's a recorded one, do the independent work themselves, and then come back to either the end of the call, if it's a live one, to check in again, to submit your work or to kind of ask any questions. Or if it's a recorded video, press play again, and then watch the last kind of plenary style of it. So there are so many different ways it's very different to a normal classroom setting, and there's a different pedagogy involved possibly can. And like I say, whether it's live, whether it's recorded, I think you need to work out for yourself what's going to work best for your context, you know, and see, because like I say, there isn't really an obvious answer there, unfortunately, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair enough. I mean, look, I think one of the most positive things I think that has come out of the pandemic, and I mean, there hasn't been many, but there has been some positives, right? And ultimately, I think it's very important to understand that in the 21st century, technology is so important. Right. I mean, we've gone for so long before the pandemic, and it blows my mind in some respects why we haven't incorporated technology into education, because you're a big advocate for it at the moment, aren't you? I see you obviously on LinkedIn that you've kind of working with a couple of technology companies to make it more inclusive into the curriculum in some respects. I think it's so important because in the 21st century, everyone's got kind of a phone, and I mean, they can get information whenever they want. I mean, in some respects, we need to kind of reach out to the children in a form that they understand, right? I mean, who actually uses a pen and paper out anymore? I mean, everyone does everything on the computer. You know, so I mean, how are we actually going to get these kids set up for the real world, life after school, without kind of incorporating technology into the curriculum? So do you think that we kind of, like, going forward and post-pandemic, do we kind of need to actually incorporate more technology in the way that we kind of get through to these children and the way that we assess them?
Yeah, I think it's about using it in the right ways, and I think it's about thinking about how you know what technology is used in the kind of working world and what's going to be useful. Because I know that I started teaching computer science about 3 or 4 years ago now. Not because I'm a computer scientist. It was a case of, you know, needing to fill a hole at school in terms of a timetable. No, Jon Tait's good with technology. He can do computer science. It was kind of, oh, hang on a second, this is a whole new ball game here in terms of my skill set. Anyway, what I found from that is that I always talk about the fact we're teaching the digital natives, but actually I found very quickly that the students that we were teaching, or I was teaching computer science, were a very, very different digital native than I thought they were. They've got loads of digital skills. They can do some amazing things in terms of the how they communicate with each other, how they can kind of collaborate on things in different kind of packages and everything. But the skills that we actually need them to be really good at, they're not that good at. So if I mean, outside of education, if you'd have said to people, these digital natives and these kids don't really know how to email and they don't know how to manage an inbox, they wouldn't believe you. But the fact of the matter is, the students that we're teaching are what I call the console generation. You know, not many of them have got actual kind of like computers at home, you know, and I think that's changing a little bit now because of the home learning. But, you know, they know how to do things on Xbox. They know how to use a handheld device and a mobile device. But actually, when you talk to them about saving things and saving it in a folder structure that you and I would both know in terms of saving it in a folder that's in another folder and how you kind of access that. Well, how do kids save anything? You know, if you think about a mobile phone, how do you save something? You literally hold your thumb down or hold your finger down on an image and it saves it. You know, you're not having to then kind of put it into, title it and put it into folders. And so they struggle with a lot of those basics because their diet of IT and their diet of technology is very much handheld mobile devices or consoles. And the very nature of using the office style packages, whether you use Microsoft, whether you use Google Suite, those kind of desktop packages of kind of, documents, presentation, Excel, sheets, whatever you want to call them, are very, very, they're just kind of quite foreign to them because they haven't really used them. And that's where I worry that I think 10 or 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, we could have quite easily ditched IT and gone to computer science because we teach us about, different transitions and stuff in slides. Now, we almost need to go back to those IT boot camp skills because students that don't have them. So I think that getting those right, so therefore they can go into the work of, they can go to, you can employ them and you would know that they already have, they know how to use Word inside out, Excel, PowerPoint, not just as in, I know how to change the font size, but actually, how to actually produce a smart looking report for your company or for that. And it just hasn't happened. And I think that there's a real need to go back to proper IT skills rather than the digital kind of, because from my point of view, there's no point kids being able to code a computer if they can't write write the letter of application to get the job in the first place, or to do the presentation really nice and neat at the interview day. You know, it's a very strange situation we've got into. So I definitely think we need to incorporate more of those digital technology skills, and just step back a little bit and think about what some of those skills are needed for. Because I know that, you know, I put something on Twitter a long time ago, maybe about 2 or 3 years ago, about this, saying that I think our kids needed more kind of basic IT skills again. And I got shot down by somebody saying that, you know, all the biggest companies in the world don't use, you know, Microsoft Office anymore, and they use all these amazing things. And my point of view is that, unfortunately, not every kid's going to work for all the best companies in the world. You know, if you look at the majority of businesses on the high street, or whatever you class as the high street, I don't necessarily mean it, but you know what I mean, like the general businesses around your town, I would bet my bottom dollar that a lot of those businesses still use things like Outlook or Gmail, you know, or Docs or Word or Excel, or, do you know what I mean? Like, and I think if we're sending kids out into the world of work who aren't familiar with, and I mean really familiar, not just, oh yeah, I know how to import a picture into it, and then they zoom it in and it gets all pixelated, you know, all those awful things. Actually, we've got to be better than that. And I think we really need to kind of focus on that at some point.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I had my niece who kind of done a little bit of work for me. I just got her to do a bit of admin, and she'd done a bit of Excel spreadsheet for me. And at the end of the 3 hours that she was working for me, she didn't know how to save the file. So she actually pressed on the cross and actually pressed no. Like, you know, it says, "Do you want to save?" She clicked no, and then she couldn't find the file. She's like, "No, I saved it." Well, clearly not. Like, it just doesn't just disappear. And it's insane, because what is the purpose of education? It's to kind of bridge the gap between school and the workplace in some respects, isn't it? And like, learning is not a destination. It's the fuel to get you somewhere, isn't it? And it's the same with money. Like, money shouldn't ever be the destination, because if you're only ever looking to the destination as money or education, then Jesus Christ, like, what are you living for? You know, like, well,
and I was just going to say, I'm thinking, talking about the way you said about there about saving. I think it's really amusing still that actually if you're in Microsoft and then you say, you know, you like click on the floppy disk icon to save it. Now, like, to anyone younger than like 30, like what is that icon? Do you know what I mean? Like people are like, that icon up there that means save, like, what is it? You know, and I think that still amuses me that we still use that floppy disk kind of save icon. And yeah, but again, you know, going through what you said there about that experience, that's a failure or it's a habit of working on a mobile device where you can probably pick up and it remembers where you're off, or in kind of something like Google where, you know, it's going to auto save it for you. And it's those type of things, but we need to kind of remember that, you know, not everything's like that, you know, and there are lots of other kind of ways to do things, and we need to, you know, really understand. You know, I'd love for my children to be in a position where they understood inside out Microsoft and Google, or prominent front running kind of like desktop office style kind of, you know, G Suite and Microsoft Office. And I've had to kind of teach them a lot about kind of, you know, the G Suite stuff, because my son has gone to college and they use Google Suite now. Now, I have been lucky enough to have access to lots of different training courses that I'm using with our staff on G Suite, and I got him on them. You know, I got him watching them, you know, because I was worried, like you're saying, that he wouldn't, you know how to save things, or we wouldn't know that it was auto save or this or that, or and there's a very different way around in Google where you know, it's quite intuitive when you get to know it. And I've transitioned over the last few months from my old school in Microsoft to Google now, and I love it. But it's a completely different mindset. You know, if you can go into a folder to start with, and then you open a document from the folder, which means it automatically saves it in that folder. Whereas at Microsoft, you do it the way around. You start it in Word, and then you choose where you save it. So it's a very different, like, almost starting from scratch, going backwards. And if you don't know that, and I think that's what we need to be teaching our kids, you know, the differences between how those big, you know, products are used, because they are so kind of common, but still we are, and that's we haven't even talked about functions in Excel or do you know what I mean, or anything like that. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, you know, so yeah, I think it's an interesting time for us. I think we need to pay more attention to that, to get students that are work ready, like you said, you know, and the example that you perfect.
I mean, like, just to kind of reiterate what you're saying, I think it's crazy, because, like, at first I was so annoyed that she didn't save it. Jesus Christ, I actually walked out of the room and I called myself down, because I was like, how can you not know how to save like a document, you know? And And then I kind of came back and I was like, you know what, like, I mean, I should have double checked, but employers aren't going to do that in the real world. And this is what we have, like, I mean, ultimately school is to help a kid find their passion and creativity and desire to want to do something and inspire them to want to learn in some respects, isn't it? And to kind of, and bridge that gap between school and the workplace. And at the moment, the kind of destination is exams. And then what? I mean, like I mean, do you feel like the current education system is fit for purpose? And sorry, just before you answer that, I'm not trying to take anything away from teachers or schools, because I think no teacher goes into school thinking, I'm not going to do right by my kids. But it's a systemic question, I think, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, and I think I was just about to say that it's not necessarily kind of teachers or schools' fault, because actually it's the curriculum and the system that, and I know we're in charge of our own curriculums, but you're not going to teach anything radically different to what you're going to be examined on. Like, although we are able to form our own curriculum, design it, etc., we're still hamstrung by what the exam boards are going to examine and what the programs of study are, because you'd be stupid to teach them it different than what was there. So we're still forced down a road, really, of kind of conforming to what the government, the exam board think is fit for purpose. And going back to that quickly before I add to that, going back to what we said about IT there and picking up IT and computer skills as an example there. Again, it's not school's fault, because as a primary school, so if thinking about my role as a secondary school teacher teaching computer science to year 7, year 8, I was frustrated that kids hadn't come up from primary school with the because they were saying to me, how do I save, sir? How do I add a text box here? How I was thinking, how do you not know? Or how do I print? But then I'm thinking, well, but when would they have had to print before? And if you think about, so I got a bit annoyed with primary schools for a few hours, thinking, well, why haven't they done this? But then I think, hang on a second, think about primary schools. Would you want a trolley of old laptops that took 30 minutes to boot up, that had no battery life, that were awful? Or would you want a nice trolley of new iPads that as soon as you turned them on, they worked? And so you can see, the diet of IT that these kids have been getting is more, iPad based at primary now, and they've been pushed into a coding route as well. So when you get to secondary, they haven't had that, that kind of formal learning of IT skills. We then get them into coding and algorithms and all this kind of stuff. And you can just see that they've totally missed that foundation level of basic kind of IT skills. So yeah, I think that's, but again, that's been pushed from the government in terms of removing IT qualifications and pushing it into computer science. And I get the fact that we are going to need computer scientists and we're going to need coders, but again, what percentage of kids are going to end up using those skills compared to the percentage of kids that are going to be using general desktop IT kind of skills? And I know, and and we all know, I always listen to this, the percentage is massively different in terms of those two areas. Do you mean, like, it's obvious? Yeah. So it's disappointing, and I think that I was just speaking to someone the other day, and they'd said that one of my colleagues had said that that the vast majority of things that we learn, we've probably learned since we've left school. Do you know what I mean? In terms of how we perform and all those different types of things. And it's I get the fact that there's got to be a balanced diet of all the different subjects, because we need scientists. And I think, well, I didn't. What have I remembered from my science lessons at school? But then on the same hand, I pick up my phone and I read that there's been a new vaccine found at Oxford University by some amazing scientists. So we need to give people the roads into those fantastic careers. It's just difficult to form something that pleases everybody and performs a great foundation. I mean, things as well, like I'm a big believer of things like what would have been called home economics when I was at school, but food technology. That is huge for people to be able to actually be self-sufficient and live and eat and be able to cook their own food and be healthy, etc. But it's totally marginalized, as a kind of an option if you want to take it. And the percentage of people that take it in the country is so small, yet it's a huge life skill that people need. For sure. And that's what I find frustrating at some points, that that there are designated things that people think are important, and we can debate all day long whether or not we think history is more important than food technology, but I know that I'm sure people use food technology skills daily across the country, across the world, as an average population, far more regularly than they'd use kind of history skills. Do you know what I mean? And that kind of stuff. Yet history's in the e-back, humanities isn't, it's pushed as a really, so there's a really interesting conversation to have about what we feel and what we actually think is really important. And, I suppose it's just unfortunate that it's dictated a lot by, policymakers, government, exam boards, et cetera, that kind of push you down a certain area. But yeah, interesting, to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I often do question. I mean, obviously, the exam industry is worth 4 billion a year or something to the UK economy, isn't it? So, I mean, how much are we actually worrying about bridging this gap between the schools and the workplace compared to actually worrying about the loss of money, so to speak, because I think you're I know, like we've said, you're a technology advocate. So in the real world, technology is a powerful thing. I mean, I was speaking to a gentleman overseas. I mean, he was kind of a senior leader in a school overseas, and what they do in their school is the application of knowledge that they assess. So they all are on a computer, they get given a case study, and then they have to not go away from their desk, but go away onto Google or whatever form of research they want to do, and then come back and apply that knowledge into the case study. So I mean, that is, so in my opinion, it is far more relevant. And then maybe sitting an hour and a half exam in silence, and actually and basing it off like information that you've memorized for that exam. I mean, I do think there is a place for it. I'm not saying that you need to completely rule it out, but I think if we're going to actually bridge this gap, we need to actually make the assessments more relevant to what is expected from employers.
Yeah, and I totally agree. It definitely is about that application of knowledge, that actually it's useless just knowing information if you can't do anything with it, because actually it's about how you use that knowledge to be successful, or to do whatever you're doing in front of you, whether it's a task, whether it's a job, whether it's you're trying to find a solution. One thing I would say though is that there was a time where probably I don't know, it was maybe quite a few years ago, where people were saying, well, hang on a second, if I've got Google, and I think there's a book written about it actually, if I've got Google, why do I need school? And actually, if I can find that information at my fingertips, like within, I mean, you do a Google search now and it's like, comes back in 0.03 seconds and that kind of stuff. So if I can find anything I want to online at my fingertips, why do I need to know this information? And a lot of the work that I've been doing, I wrote and I wrote about it recently in my last book about kind of knowledge and retrieval, is that knowing things helps you know more things, because it also helps with that kind of cognitive load. If you don't know anything and you've got to find something and you've got to then work out what it is, and it takes a whole much more cognitive load process to work out what it is to start with. Whereas if you know something and you've got it and it's automated and you understand it, you can also connect that to other facts. So it builds that schema in your mind. So there are things that we know that when you know things, the way it works in our brain is that you don't just know lots of randomly connect facts that are not connected, because you would never be able to remember them all. The way we can remember them is that they start to link to each other, and they start to link. So that a certain smell goes with that, and it goes to a taste, and there's all those different things it links to. If you don't know that information, you then can't connect the dots. And it then becomes a lot more difficult, and you have to have a lot more brain power and cognitive demands if you have to be searching it all the time, getting it, not knowing the context of it. You just know the word, and you don't know anything else about it. So I do think that knowing things is really important, but there's definitely a balance between, there's no point knowing things and not knowing how to kind of put it into action. I think that I see that unfortunately, with sometimes with new teachers, that there was a drive quite a few years ago to get a bit like in Finland, I think it is, where they've got they've kind of they only have really first class honors, graduates become teachers, and there was a drive really to get, I suppose, in a crude kind of way, more intelligent people with higher class degrees into teaching. Now
that's the teacher's program, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I know from being an ex kind of director of a teaching school and running our teacher training programs, I know right now that as a generalization here, and I'm not saying this about every single person, but generally, more intelligent people don't always make better teachers. Because again, it's how you apply that, how you apply those in a teaching sense, how you apply those techniques in the classroom, how you understand context, how you are able to kind of, build rapport and build relationships. And sometimes the more intelligent you are means that you are in some circles. Yeah. And have less ability to be able to do those, to build relationships with year 9 boys on a Wednesday afternoon when they've come from PE. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And it's so I think that it's all about how you apply that knowledge, and yes, you need a certain level of knowledge and you need to know things, to know other things, like I said, but it definitely is about the application of it in any walk of life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've spoken to a few employers myself, and like it's this general consensus that actually none of us actually look at GCSE results. I mean, what we actually look for is a diamond in the rough. We want someone that's got like personality, interpersonal skills, confidence, that can present, that can look me in the eye when they're having a conversation with me, that can kind of challenge ideas and come up with something better. Because we don't know everything, do we? I mean, let's face it, we don't know everything. But if we're always going to go by the book, we're never going to challenge ideas. It's about kind of learning the book and then using it and actually thinking, look, I mean, something that Colin Goffin said to me a little bit earlier today when I was recording with him, he said, like, learning the knowledge is to get into the club. Once you're in the club and you know the information, then it's about blowing the club up and actually starting your own club, and it's I mean, it took me a while to understand what he meant, but actually, learning knowledge doesn't necessarily mean that you can actually do things different. And actually, the FTSE 100 companies, they want people that are going to come in and challenge ideas, that are going to be innovative, that are going to say, you know what, this is the way you're doing it, but actually, I've got a fresh view on this, and that's the beautiful thing about learning. It's forever evolving. So, I mean, just learning information and just learning things that we already know. I mean, how is that going to benefit you in your life, And I think there's more to life than just like knowledge. You're right, there's a place for it, but I think there's more to it too.
Yeah, and lots of the knowledge that you learn as a student at primary or secondary school, you probably forget anyway. It doesn't stick with you forever, and it is definitely about how you can. I heard a great quote once saying, "True knowledge is knowing what to do when you don't know what to do."
Yeah.
Or true intelligence, I think it was. It's knowing what to do when you don't know what to do, and it's about, if you think about. Google. Let's look at that Google, kind of example. That Google's there, and you can probably find anything you want to on Google, within a few seconds. But you have to know how to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily about the fact, Google's there, because I see in my own kids writing questions into Google to find something, and they put so many words in. They actually ask it, right? They would ask it out loud.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, don't put that word in. Why not? I said, well, it doesn't need to really make sense. It just needs to say how, not like, how would I do? Do you know what I mean? Get rid of all those words, because the more words you're putting in, the less likely anything's going to come back in your search, because it's only going to search for that exact kind of, so you trim it to 3 words. And it's, so it's how we can ask those questions, how we can be smart, what type of questions to ask to get the information we need. I think that's a skill in itself, in itself, rather than just Google's there and go for it. You and I could Google something now, we could Google it in a very different way, and also we need to understand that, which is probably a whole different topic now, I won't get into it too much, but you and I can Google something with exactly the same words and we can both get different answers, and that's a really frightening kind of, that we, and I've watched a few TED Talks on this, where our browsing habits and our kind of general online habits are taken, and our results are determined on what Google thinks we want to see, and we need to remember that and that's a very frightening place to be in terms of thinking, it's not just an open encyclopedia that you will always get the same results,
Absolutely, yeah.
You look on Facebook and things now, and if you've been searching something on Google and you've been looking at something like a winter jacket or a scarf or something like that, and then you go to Facebook 10 minutes later and the advert pops up on there and the same thing. And people get, reeled into it and they go, oh, it must be fate. The same jacket that I was looking at has just popped up on my feed. I need to get it. I knew I needed to get it. And but you're getting clickbaited in, you're getting reeled in. And it's the same when you do a search. That, again, we need to be telling students that and teaching them that, like we've always been told, just because it's been printed either in a paper or on the internet doesn't mean it's real. But also, how can you, a bit like you in maths, when you do like a guesstimate, how can I check that this is right? You know, I'm doing a sum, I put it in my calculator and I get a ridiculously massive answer. Actually, is that really right? Is that what I thought it might be? And it's about having those same skills to be able to actually judge and kind of cross kind of check and have those counterbalances. Is that what's coming back to me? Where's the source from? You know, is it a reliable source? What makes a reliable source? You know, how can I check that actually? Otherwise, people are just going to be writing stuff down from Google and saying, well, it was on Google, so it's true. Well, hang on a second. I could write a blog this afternoon and I could put a load of lies in and post it. And just because Jon Tait says it doesn't mean it's true, but it's on the internet. You know, and I think we need to, so there's all those skills we need to build in as well about how we can get students to, you know, that, and again, you know, that idea of like fake news that's kind of gripped us all over the last few months in terms of the Trumpism stuff. But, you know, how can we actually spot fake news? How can we spot an unreliable source? How do we know how to do a really intelligent kind of Google search and all those type of things? I think are growing needs to be able to be really effective human beings. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. You know, those advert things. I mean, this is what a lot of people don't understand is actually Facebook have us as avatars in some respects. And they understand the kind of searches we do. And it's all very relevant to us and our patterns. It's mental the way technology is changing. I think there was a thing on WhatsApp the other day where you had to accept the new terms and conditions, which kind of gave them more freedom to actually look into you in some respects. And it's mental. I mean, the world is changing and it's absolutely right. You're absolutely right in respect to we need to prepare our children of the future to actually what they're going to do with that information, you know. And I think for far too long in schools, in some respects, we spoon feed children to pass exams, not to think critically. And I think that is a big flaw at the moment. And I think that's kind of what we need to move away from.
Yeah, definitely. And it was when you said there about the adverts on Facebook, I was hoping you were going to say, and actually I bought that quote. But yeah, no, I think we do. We need to, get them to think. It's those critical thinking skills I think are really important. I think because it's like I say, that's where you differentiate between someone who's going to be a highly effective human being and can really move to the top of an organization compared to someone who can just work under instruction. I think that's where you start to shift between the gears, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we only need to look at the 21st century. Like, I mean, if you go back 20 years, there was like maybe 5 estate agents in an area. Now there's one on every bloody corner, you know, and people want their flexibility. They want it to be independent. They want to be entrepreneurs. They want to they don't necessarily want to work for someone. So, I mean, how are we going to give these kids the leadership skills to be able to actually hone in on their skills and actually live a better life? And I think what we're doing right now, in some respects, and it's no fault of teachers or schools, but is a little bit dated in the way that the 21st century has moved. I mean, I was reading this book by Priya Lakhani, Inadequate, and still reading it. But one of the things that she makes very clear is over the last 100 years, I mean, maybe 100 years ago, 200 years ago, the literacy and numeracy rate was only like 20% around the world, and now it's like 80%. But we are still very much focusing on and teaching on those skills that we were 100 to 200 years ago. You know, I mean, it's about how are we actually going to incorporate the 21st century when the technology has moved on so much, and we're still very much like teaching, like having a focus on those core subjects like we always have. And I think,
I think if you look at the curriculum and look at how different it is from 100 years ago or 20 years ago, 30, pick any date in time, whether it's when you went to school, whether it's when your parents went to school, whether it's when their parents went to school, and look at the different kind of subjects and look at the different kind of ways that we do it, and actually, or not the different ways we kind of do it, and actually it's not that dissimilar, you know. And I've done a presentation before at a conference where I've put a picture up of a kind of Victorian kind of school setting with kids all sat in rows on individual desks, a teacher at the front, in front of a blackboard, and I've just said, think now about all the changes in digital technology. Think what the internet's done to us. I mean, the internet's just changed the world completely in terms of how we do things, our habits, the things we're doing right now. But look at that picture there of that kind of Victorian school and think about your classroom right now and how much different actually is it? And have our classrooms changed at the same rate as the way technology has? And are we utilizing things in the right way? Or are we still very Victorian in our kind of approaches? You know, and that kind of, you know, we still have, that kind of approach where we bring kids in kind of age groups, you know, rather than stages. You know, we have those distinct subjects. You know, we have, you know, and there's all those type of things that, you know, if you look at things out there that talk about creativity in schools, it's an interesting that have we moved forward as much as we have done, you know, and the answer probably is no.
Yeah, and it's crazy because, and we'll finish off here, but like I was reading these stats, and the average house price in the UK in 1980 was £19,000, and the average salary was £6,000. In 2017, the average salary it was £19,000, and the average house price was £217,000. I mean, compared to 1980, the average first-time buyer was like 21 years old, and in the UK in 2017, the average house first-time buyer was 37 years old. And what that really demonstrates, is obviously there's a massive increase in population and there's a low supply of properties. But overall, if we look at it in perspective, are we actually equipping children with the right skills for the 21st century, or are we still equipping them with the right skills for the 1980s? And I think like if we're going to actually give these kids a chance to actually compete in the real world, because if our UK economy is going to compete globally in the next 10 to 15 years' time, we need to be equipping these children with those right skills so we can move the economy forward. But if countries around us are doing it and we're not doing it, we're going to get left behind. And we're only a little island. And if we get left behind, we're screwed. I mean, we can't take over the world again. So, I mean, we're going to be pretty screwed. So we need...
Absolutely. We do. And I think there's right now, it's time for change. And it's the right conditions because of the fact we've had no exams for 2 years, or we won't by the time the summer comes. I've had two exams for 2 years at GCSE, A-level. There is a real opportunity to really look at what we're delivering, how we're delivering, how we're assessing it, going back to what we said about exams, and really think properly about what the new world is requiring, and whether or not there's change required or whether there's tweaks required. But I think now is the opportunity for us to seize it. I hope that we do that. I'm not so sure we will. I hope that we do, because I think there's an opportunity for it. But what I don't want is just stopgap kind of solutions to get us through the next 6 months. I think it's an opportunity to look at everything and go, right, where are we? What are we doing? How are we doing it? Is it fit for purpose? Is it working? Because there is an obvious kind of opportunity that's opened up now for us to look at how we do it differently. And I think if we take that, then we might find that some things are very different in the future. And if we don't, then we might be having this conversation in another 10 years' time, saying that house prices are now 500 grand, and kids still don't know how to do emails, and they still don't know how to save documents, and all that kind of stuff. So, we'll see.
The thing is, like, ultimately, majority of things are going to be automated within the next 10 to 20 years, everything. I mean, we do it with social media at the moment. So, I mean, when so many jobs are going to be automated, where do these kids' futures lie? And this is what we've got to be really challenging at, like, our kind of policymakers or whoever decides what happens in education, because there's no point building up a workforce for an area of work that is no longer needed. It's about building a future for these kids in areas that we need them for, right? And it's where the skills shortage is. So that's what we've got to look at, I think. And ultimately, if we're going to make that change, we've got to come together as a profession and actually support each other and actually collaborate and actually come up with ways that we're going to make that happen. Because right now, I just feel like we're short of being fit for purpose. And again, it's no fault of anyone's that is within school or the profession, but I think in some respects it's got to come from above, but and then on the flip side, I think it's got to come from the ground up. I think if look how powerful it was when the union stood together and actually said, enough's enough. We're advising teachers to stay at home, and the government had to U-turn. And it's, I think if we're going to actually make those changes, we're going to have to do the exact same thing in respect to getting the profession together and actually standing as one, opposed to just kind of the different, like maybe instead of like a school at a time.
Yeah, I think you're right. It takes us all from a kind of a thought process and an imagination and creativity process, and then trying to push it forward. But there's got to be, I suppose, a will from all parties and all sides to make it work. And hopefully there is, and hopefully we get there with this, because I think you're right. Everything you've said, you're absolutely right. Things are changing and things will change in the future, and we need to make sure that how we're preparing students for the future is as good as we can possibly do it.
Yeah, I mean, that's all I want, John. I mean, this podcast it started off as creating appreciation for what teachers are doing, but to kind of now on this movement of trying to actually bring the profession together and actually trying to move education forward. Because I think for far too long, teachers have been kept quiet. I mean, obviously, there's a massive thing on Twitter. I mean, there's a massive like debates, and there's always things happening on teacher Twitter, so I like to call it. But ultimately, the public, like they don't know what's going on, and ultimately, you guys are the professionals, and it's about time we start hearing from you. And I really hope that this platform is only the start of being able to give you that opportunity to speak. But I really think that we need to come together and actually move education forward. But Jon, I mean, you've obviously always great to have you, and the input has been brilliant. But ultimately, look, I will call it, because I know I've taken up a lot of your time for the second time in a row. So yeah, look, thanks for coming on again, and everyone that's watching, thank you for obviously watching.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me on. It's been great to chat, and I look forward to making an appearance in season 3. Then, if I've got some kind of residency, then why not?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you might have to be a regular, Jon. So yeah, I mean, yeah, thanks for coming on. But yeah, let's keep in touch as usual. And guys, see you on the next episode.